Okay, today is December 3rd, 2013. This is Brent Björkman, the director of the Kentucky Folklife program, and I'm in the process of doing some interviews for the Library of Congress for the Occupational Folklife project, part of the Archie Green Fellowship. And we're here at working at Mammoth Cave, talking to some of the park rangers. We're really about the working lives of park rangers, talking to many different folks in different places in their careers. I'll be going off-site away from Mammoth Cave in the weeks to come, talking to retired folks, be traveling to some other parks, federally related parks in Kentucky as well. But Mammoth Cave is a place that is near my home, and have a lot of great folks here. And I'm here today with David Spence. David is going to tell us a little bit about his connection to his job. And maybe, David, we could just start out by talking about, you know, where you're from, and maybe how you got interested. Has it been a childhood memory thing that it first started traveling to parks, or how did you get connected to this job?
Well, I grew up in the area, and my earliest recollection of Mammoth Cave was my mom brought me here when I was about 7. And of course, when you live in this area, going to school, you go on school trips, so I never thought I'd ever be a park ranger, but I thought it would be a cool job. And how I got associated, years later, after I got out of the Navy, I started university at Western in the anthropology program. And I would volunteer up here. I would come up and volunteer and assist the archaeologist, who was not here at Mammoth Cave, but at Big South Fork. His name was Tom Lejean. So I'd helped him do some surface surveys here in the park, over on the north side and on the south side, and I also assisted Dr. George Crothers, and at that time he was finishing up his doctorate at the Wash U in St. Louis. And my first project that I ever did inside the cave was with Dr. Crothers, and that was doing surveys along Audubon Avenue in the rotunda for the Paving Stones. And then later on, that led into me getting hired on as assistant archaeologist in the Earthwatch program. The Earthwatch program involved a cultural inventory of a 3-mile stretch of cave, main cave, from basically Chief City to the entrance. And this entailed volunteer work for people who wanted to do this type of work. This was kind of a public archaeological program, and Earthwatch is an organization that supplies the volunteers, and George, myself, and some other folks were the mentors. And so for 6 years of that, I was on the last 6 years. It was a project that lasted over 10 years. I started, I think, in '99, and that's how I got my foot in the door at Mammoth Cave. Of course, that's not a full-time job, so I thought it'd be neat to be a guide here, part-time, and some of my student comrades had also worked, and they kept telling me, you need to work here as a guide. So I applied online one year, didn't get it, and then the next year I submitted an application, brought it in person, and I got hired on as a seasonal in 2003.
Okay.
And then worked that season. It was early, I think I was here in February of 2003, and worked that season, which was it was an awesome season. And then that winter they came out with 4 permanent positions. And I applied, and they actually hired 6, and I was one of the 6 that was hired. So that's how I got here as a guide at Mammoth Cave. And
so first it was temporary. People have been telling me it's seasonal.
Right. Now I'm kind of a rare bird. I was only a seasonal, less than a season, 6 months. There's been people here for years that have tried to get a permanent position, and I think my experience with the Earthwatch and the archaeological resources at Mammoth Cave really helped me get one of those positions.
Yeah. What was your, do you recall your first day when you started that season, that first seasonal work?
Yeah, I remember showing up. I met Kathy Prophet. She's the daily operations supervisor. And I was in civilian clothes. I didn't have a uniform yet. I trailed some tours. And I think I actually trailed a tour by myself. I mean, there was another ranger, but it was in the wintertime. It was slow. And I did that before I was actually officially trained. And then we had our training with where I met the other new seasonals. There was, I think, 6 in the class or in that group, and there was a couple that were volunteers, and there was one fellow, Ronnie Doyle, who was a guide in the early 70s, but had come back years later after he retired from his school teaching. So my first day, I remember, they threw me in the mix, threw me in the cave, and that's how things work here. You know, it's kind of more of a on-the-job training.
Yeah.
But it was exciting. It still is.
Yeah. You had some first mentors, or I mean,
First mentors. Of course, all the like Joe Duval, Bobby Steenbergen, Chuck DeCroy. I was paired with Chuck a lot. Chuck actually would let me, I was still in that process of learning the guide. I was with Chuck a lot, and he would actually let me do a presentation in the cave, and I would do something archaeological. Talk about the Earthwatch program or the archaeological resources or the prehistoric, and that really helped me, as we say, jump up on the rock and start doing a program.
So can you tell me more about the Earthwatch program? You said it was something in place for about 10 years. Was Carruthers, was he?
Carruthers wasn't the first. I can't think. It was a lady, and I guess once she got her graduate program, doctorate, whatever, finished, George took over.
Was it a federal?
It's federal, yeah. Now, Earthwatch program is actually a nonprofit organization, and they partnered. The National Park Service partnered with Earthwatch to do this. Basically, we're mandated by laws. There were some laws that had passed about having inventories of resources, cultural inventories of resources, and a lot of what we have at Mammoth Cave is actually still in the cave. When we find artifacts, we leave them in the cave. They've been there for thousands of years. So they wanted to do this, the 3-mile stretch, main cave, historic route, Broadway, to actually see what was still there. Cause there's been a lot of impact in the last couple hundred years, the saltpeter works and tours and anything else. So they partnered with Earthwatch. They provided the volunteers. And basically, these are people that were going on vacation, they want to do something different. They would say, okay, I want to go on an expedition somewhere, and they would go to Earthwatch webpage. Oh, Mammoth Cave, let's go to Mammoth Cave. And so they would come, and we provided them with a place to stay at the research station, and I think one year we stayed at Hamilton Valley. And basically it was for 10 days. We go in the cave, we went late in the evening, so we didn't impact on tours, and we stayed down there for about 6 or 7 hours, come out about 9 or 10 o'clock. Usually there was about 10 volunteers. We'd break them up. We'd have the discovery team, and then we have a mapping team, and we had a photographic team. The mapping team, or the discovery team, their job was to crawl around the breakdown, look for artifacts, flag them. We had flags, and if you've ever been to Mammoth Cave during Earthwatch, there'd be flags all over the place where artifacts had been found. And then we had these cards, and they would describe, measure, detail everything, document as much as they could, and we had codes. We had prehistoric codes and we had historic codes. Anything that was after 1700 would be historical. Anything that was prehistoric. And then we had subcodes for different things, So they did all that, and they would just move along finding stuff. And sometimes a flag might have 5 or 6 cards. We did signatures, and we had flags stuck to the walls all over the place. And we did a section. We do a section to keep it systematic. Then the mapping team would come in, and we'd map everything. We had a theodolite, a laser transit. And I did a lot of that. I assisted with the volunteers with that quite a bit. And we had one person out on the stick, the stadia, and this was all mapped electronically. We could download it to a computer and see where things were. And then we had the photographic. And the photographer was Chuck Swedlin. He was the project photographer, and he would get some volunteers and go through all his indoctrination on what they were going to do. They didn't photograph everything. They only photograph unique and best representative type artifacts. So that's what we did. And then the park was really good. They'd have a day off, providing cave trips. I mean, the food was good, the stay was good, and I mean, they got to see stuff that the normal tourists wouldn't get to see. And I've talked to some of those people that had been on numerous other Earthwatch projects all over the world, Africa, and he said by far the Mammoth Cave one was the cheapest, but was probably the best experience that they experienced from other places.
What an interesting way for you to get a... I mean, I know you came here as a child,
right,
and this, but what an interesting way for you to, I don't know, maybe subconsciously kind of feeling this place out. Is this a place I like?
Well, I'll tell you what, my first day in the cave on Earthwatch, I wasn't familiar with the cave too much. We had left some flags. We left our flags outside, so I had to walk out of the cave to get the flags. We're a mile in the cave. So I, being the low guy on the totem pole, I had to go get the flags. So I'm walking through the cave all by myself. Got the cave to myself. No lights on, just got my helmet and my headlamp. And I'm walking through the cave, and I'm just walking around. I was like, wow, I got to stay here. This was neat. So it was like the cave was talking to me as I was walking out of the cave.
I was thinking about those Earthwatch volunteers and just your own sensibilities as a person, and whether you have these aspirations to be a teacher. I mean, you did it for 6 years, so does that transfer into your current job as somebody who sees these people for certainly not a week or two at a time, but for a couple hours at a time? And did you see the volunteers as visitors in a sense, and did that help you maybe grow into what?
Well, maybe, yeah, in some way, but they're the grunts. They're the
and they knew it. I mean,
they knew it, but also they were also visitors. It was a learning experience for them too, and being in the cave and being in the local and growing up in the area, you're always telling them other things related to the cave. So it was, I guess you could say, it was volunteer / visitor. I mean, we did take them on other tours. We took them on crawling tours. Every day, a ranger would come over and do a presentation, a slideshow presentation with them. So, yeah, they were visitors too. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I would like to say that I was still on Earthwatch when I got hired on. So I would do a full 8-hour day guiding, and as soon as I was done, I'd jump in my coveralls and back in the cave for another 8 hours in the cave. And I did that until the last year when we did our last artifacts in the Rotunda in 2004 or 5. And I think we had over 13,000 datum points, and no telling how many man hours, tens of thousands of man hours. Mm. So it was a good program.
So it was nice. I mean, that program is phasing out. I mean, it's a perfect time for you to
right.
To me,
yeah, it was great to see it done, but I was kind of sad to see it go. It's time to move on. But there have been other little projects that have splintered off. I mean, that data's still there. It's there for researchers, and it's there for the park to go back and see how artifacts are being impacted, or if things moved around, and we can go back and check on things. So,
it's good to feel part of that. I mean,
yes, yeah, that was major.
As I'm starting this project, and one of the reasons I do it is because I want to learn about all the connective and what does it mean to be a park ranger. I'm learning about there's the interpretive, and then there's there's a law enforcement and that sort of thing, and everybody brings a specialty of some sort to it. And can you tell me about how you work with this great group of people that you bring your own sensibilities to it, and maybe how you've added to a particular.
Well, I try to, with my background with the archaeological resources, one of the things I've really pushed here is resource protection. How do we protect the cave? It's not just the guide's or the interpreter or the ranger's job, and his partners, but it's everybody's job, the visitor. Why is it important to protect this? There's laws involved. There's an enabling legislation. 1916 Organic Act, protect, preserve, conserve, leave the senior unimpaired and for future generations to enjoy. So that's one thing that I guess that I've tried here. My little niche is more of the prehistoric, especially on the Valsy Lantern Tour. Is there is tell that prehistoric story, but why is it important to protect this? Why don't we? There are bodies in the cave. There's got to be this respect, and also Civil War. That's another little niche. And that comes right from Earthwatch. One of the artifacts that I found was a board. On the back side of the board, there was a flag drawn on it, and William Garvin. Will Garvin was a guide. He was a slave. He was also a soldier. And at that point, I didn't know who the guy was, so I started doing some research and found out he was a slave, and then he's also a soldier during the Civil War. And I've always had an interest in the Civil War, but the Civil War story at Mammoth Cave wasn't being told. I mean, he was there, and so I guess that's my other thing that I've given is tell that story, the Civil War story here at Mammoth Cave. The soldiers that have come, they have a story to tell, and it's not just battles and such. It's also, there's other things in marching. We can go see Mammoth Cave. Business as usual here. Let's have some fun, So that's something I've really have done here. I've helped put together binders. I've collected letters and first-hand accounts. I've done first-person living history dress-up type interpretation here. So it's been fun doing that and telling that story.
So your life as a guide is also they've let you stretch your wings and you go after the things that interest you. Where do you do this? Where would you do this research?
Well, before I was I worked at the Kentucky Library, the special collections in Bowling Green at Western Kentucky University, and this, I guess I cut my research with. This is before the internet. You had to actually look at documents, or if there was microfilm, or you had to maybe do interlibrary loan and get something. And so I spent a lot of time in the library up there. They have an incredible collection. Or I'd have to go to other facilities, like up in Louisville or to the Filson, the State Archives, which is another great facility, the Kentucky Historical Society, or even going out of state to public like courthouses and things like that. The internet has really made access to, especially first-hand accounts and letters, more accessible, where archives and manuscripts are putting that stuff online, and also where people that have this in their own family collection is getting on the internet. So this is what I pull from to tell that story of the soldiers.
Do you do that on your off time, or is it?
I do it. I do a lot on my off time, but I also do a lot here at Mammoth Cave when I got time. If I run across a new signature in the cave, or a really neat story. We got a letter. This was a couple of years ago. It was actually last winter. We got a letter from a fella, and he had a letter that it was his wife's granddad. And he was a soldier from Illinois. He had written a letter to his wife. And one of the town that he was at was Munfordville. Well, he misspelled it. He didn't know what Munfordville was. He didn't know what Mammoth Cave was. He said, "What is Mammoth Cave?" Well, we wrote a letter back to him, and this guy had been up to Munfordville. He was a Union soldier, and he's describing slaves being sold at that time. That was still legal. He's describing the cave. He gets excited about describing the cave. So we write a letter back to this guy. I said, well, he was here. And at the Kentucky Library, they have the hotel registers for that time frame. I was able to photograph this man's name in the hotel register and send it back to him and his wife. So it's neat things like that.
Yeah, and your specialty. I mean, it just adds to everything.
Yeah, you take it a step further, try to make that connection. One of the first ones I ever tried to research was I had a lady whose grandfather or great-grandfather was from a Louisiana regiment, and in her family history, he said he came to Mammoth Cave and wrote his name somewhere in the cave. I've never found it, but I don't doubt that he was ever here.
Wow.
There's a lot of stories out there.
Yeah.
As I tell people, even today, every name on that wall in the cave tells us there's a story involved.
Tell me about the different. I haven't really talked to too many people, and I don't know if you can encapsulate. They've been talking about different cave tours at the historic cave tour. Can you tell me about? And you mentioned one that maybe lent itself to more a Civil War, or maybe it was more to an archaeological one where you're able to have more touchstones.
Right. The historic tour is, to me, the classic Mammoth Cave tour. That's Fat Man's Misery. That's the Big Cave. That's the John Houchin's Bear Story. Rotunda, the Saltpeter Works, the different levels, Mammoth Dome. There's a basic story involved with that trip, but every guide can adjust it to his liking or what the visitor. They may ask a question, and bam, you'll just take off from there. So the historic tour, I just talk historic. I might throw a little geology in here and there, but it's historic, and I might do a basic, I'll talk about saltpeter and its importance at Mammoth Cave, but I might talk more something related to Civil War. I'll talk, guided tours beginning in 1816, tourism. Well, let's talk about the Civil War era, the soldiers' experience through the cave. Violet Sea Lantern Tour, that's a 3-hour trip. I really delve into the prehistoric. Once we get out of the main cave, beyond Giant's Coffin, in that part of the cave, archaeological record in that part of the cave is incredible. I mean, you walk through, and if you look, there's stuff laying everywhere. And that's part of the cave that I spend a lot of time in. It's like going home. And so I really talk up the prehistoric peoples, try to paint their life thousands of years ago. Why did they come in the cave? We don't know why they came in, but we can maybe guess why. Maybe it's the same reason why we're in there. Who knows? So going in different parts of the cave seems to have its own personality. Different tours have that different personality. I wouldn't talk a lot of history on a new entrance tour. That's more of a geology tour. That history, in the last 80 years it's there, but it's more of a geology tour, I guess you could say. So every tour has we're supposed to have outlines, but we customize. Every tour it's custom. That's what's great about working here. They don't give you a script. So here, regurgitate this back to the visitor. We have a basic outline of what we could talk about, but then we can just it's like a tree. There's branches of just, you can talk about whatever is interesting to you, or like I said, a visitor might ask a question. There's a book out on Stephen Bishop. It's a children's book. And sometimes I'll get school groups, and I'll ask, "What are you guys studying?" And it's, "Oh, we're reading this book about Stephen Bishop." And they're on a historic tour, so I'll custom that whole tour on that book. I'll stop in places where that book, the places in the book that are mentioned in the book, and say Stephen was here, so they can connect with the book. And this was a real guy in a real place.
Yeah. How about some stories, funny or interesting stories about maybe there's something that sharing some visitor's aha moment or something that you remember or just something comical or maybe even scary that happened that turned out?
Well, we got a lot of potty stories.
Oh.
There's always that going to happen.
The people can't wait.
They can't wait. They got to go. There's an accident. There's a lot of those. But I don't want to make fun of any visitor because it happens. It happens. And I tell them it happens. Probably the one that I remember most, where you really leave something meaningful with the visitor. I had a lady get off the bus, and she came up and hugged me. And I could just see in her eyes twinkles, tears. She was moved. I was like, wow, I did my job. That's what I wanted. I'm not out there to beat it in you, but everything clicked, and she came away with something. She got her experience, Mammoth Cave experience. That's my job. That's what I'm trying to do, and I love that. I love when you walk away and people are just smiling, and it's like, wow, I've just walked through Mammoth Cave, and I'm the guide. I gotta take you down there and show you this place and try to say something that's meaningful for everybody. There's only so much time and that you can do this, but you got to connect with everybody. Even it don't matter if they're 4 or 80 years old.
It's a challenge.
It is. So that one time, that lady, she came off the bus and she came up and gave me a hug, and that was good. And there was another time. I had this. Sometimes you get kids that they're in with it. They're all about science and the history, and they're really paying attention. And I had this kid. He was up front with me. He was always asking questions, and he was. This guy's a future ranger. You can just tell. And we get out of the cave, and he's on the bus, and I could see him watching me. And there's a guy smoking. Sometimes people, just before we get on the bus, they'll light one up. And this guy was smoking. I said, "Okay, we gotta go." So he throws a cigarette down. It's just natural to do it, I guess. But we're in a national park. You can cause a forest fire, and this kid's watching us. What's Ranger Dave going to do? And I said, "Sir, only you can prevent a forest fire." And the guy looked at me. He says, "Yeah, I think you're right." So he picks it up and puts it in his pocket, and then look back at the kid, and he gives me the the thumbs up. So that made me feel good. The kid, he saw that we do care about the place.
Yeah. Have you seen many changes? I spoke with someone else about anything from different equipment over the time to...
The lights have definitely changed. When I first came as a child, the place was lit up like a football stadium. You could see everything. They had different types of lights. And I was the monitoring archaeologist for the lighting project. I was on furlough. At that time, I had a furlough. So on my furlough in the wintertime, I was with the electricians in the cave, rewiring the cave and putting in the new lights. And that transition from our old lighting system to the new, it was a major difference. It wasn't as bright. And people that had come in the past, they'll say there's something different about this place. And I says, "Is it darker?" I said, "Yes." So I think that's probably one of the big things that's changed since I've been here. The lighting, the trails. This is always a work in progress. I was on one of the first things I did in the cave was a survey for trail improvement, and that's the Paving Stones.
Yeah, tell me more about that. You mentioned that before.
The Paving Stones, they have a tow board, and basically that's to cut down on the dust and catch the lint off the clothes. Keep that stuff contained to the trail. Because if you walk through the cave, you can see, there's a dust problem in parts of the cave, especially where the trail's really dirty, or we're still walking on dirt trails. So that's a fix. We're always trying to minimize our impact. So sometimes we have to build something to minimize that impact. So right below the historical CCC trail, through that trail, or underneath that, that archaeological record's still intact. It's still there. So that trail is almost like a cap protecting that. So they didn't have to chip up or break up the old trail. They just put the paving stones right on top of that. And basically, our job was to see what type of archaeological stuff was below there. There's not going to be any impact because the trail, actually the paving stones protecting the old trail. So that was the purpose behind the paving stones. One of the things I like to, like I said, it's a work in progress. Eventually they're going to have most of the cave trails like that. And when we come out of Little Bat there, on the historic, we're gathering up and waiting for everybody to come out of Mammoth Dome. And I'm just asking questions, or people got questions, and just conversing with the crowd. And I'll ask them, I was like, well, I'll tell them about the paving stones and what their purpose is. And I'll ask them, well, how do you, I'll say, hey, we're going to have the whole historic route. Paving stones, how many paving stones do you think it's going to take to finish that? And I'll get all these crazy answers. Millions, 2 million, nah, billion, nah. And then finally I'll say, only going to take one to finish it. The last one.
So the humor.
Yeah, you got to throw a little humor in. I try not to do humor too much. It's a serious place, but, sometimes you need the humor to break the ice. Sometimes people are so scared going in the cave, they're frightened, and you want to put them at ease, so you throw a little humor in.
Are you able to see that?
Oh yeah, I could see. One of the first things you do is you scare the hell out of them. You tell them what they got themselves into. You do the old, we got this white card, safety card, and there's this one part where we want you to consider your own limitations. I do an abstract or a short thing of what you're going to do on the tour, and I want you to consider negotiating stairs, tight spots, going up in elevation, down in elevation, being in the cave, heights, and then health issues, heart, respiratory, circulatory, joint replacements, pacemakers, because if you have any problems in the cave, it's going to take a long time to get you out. And that's watered down. That's watered down. So, some people, the first time I ever heard Joe Duval do his talk, I thought, I'm his trailer. I was like, do I need to be going on this tour? Because he'll scare, Joe's actually has lawsuits involving on a cave tour, so.
But it's a serious thing.
It is a serious thing, and I'll tell you, I have seen everything in the cave. There's nothing I have not seen related to health. I've seen hurt ankles, respiratory, heart problems, people going into labor. That's happened once. Luckily, no baby coming out of the cave extra. For the most part, people listen to your advice. There's people who are going to have health issues they don't know about. That's going to happen, and you got the ones or the few that don't listen to good wisdom. We can't tell them not to go in a cave or not to go on the cave tour. I can advise you, and hopefully they take that advice.
Where's the future in that? I mean, what's the evolution? It seems like people are being more mindful of both tangible and intangible kinds of things, or you try to getting those things across?
Yeah. Protecting the cave, protecting yourself. That was something I had to struggle with when I first started working here. Was this idea of interpretation and working in universal concepts, and you had tangibles and intangibles, and working those in. There's all kind of tangibles, but let's throw in some intangibles concepts. Fear in the cave, excitement, and these could be universal concepts, death, the unknown. So I think we do a pretty good job of working those in. I try to be passionate. If you're not passionate, to me, I found that you got to be passionate. You don't want to be dry. This is the cave, 140 feet underground. Welcome to the rotunda, This ain't even the big room. You know, you got to get them excited. And they are excited. But you just pull them in more.
How about bigger groups or smaller groups? Can you tell me a little bit about interactions?
Larger groups, you don't interact unless you're stopped and you're waiting for everybody to catch up. But you can't interact as much. You interact before and after the tour, maybe a little bit while you ask some questions. Not as much if you had a smaller group. And I'll tell people, you better ask questions because I will talk you. I will talk for 3 hours. And I can do it too. Earlier I had a tour, his store had 6 people. So I was able to show them some things that I don't normally show people. But you just can't with 120 people. You know, you got to be in and out of the cave at a certain time. But with a smaller group, you're able to share more of the cave, tell more of the story of the cave, spend a little bit more time. It's quiet. You know, one of the things I commented, it was so nice walking through main cave, and it was so quiet. It was like that first time I walked through it by myself. I got to experience that also. So it's nice to have a small group, but it's good to have the larger groups too. It flips flops, I guess. I like small groups because I like to gab.
When you have a large group or a small group, do you always have somebody trail? If it's small enough, can you do it yourself?
Our policy here, if it's 25 and less, it doesn't trail unless there's someone on the tour you think might be a problem, a health issue, or maybe a parent's got too many little ones. And then we'll have another ranger, but that's the policy. If it's above 26, then there's another ranger.
What kind of advice would you give to somebody who's starting off and they look like they could be really good, and how would you help to mentor them, whether they implicitly ask you for advice?
Well, the first thing I always tell them is don't worry about your story. That'll come. Work on your timing. Learn the timing. That's very important. Because if you're late getting out of the cave, that means your partner is going to be late getting out of the cave. He might not like that. And then if it's like the summer, you got other tourists coming behind you. So it's important to have your program. It's also important about that timing. Probably the biggest thing is don't try to tell everything that you've learned. One of the things, and I did it too, is you're so excited about doing your job. You're finally up on the rock and you're wanting to do the Mammoth Cave guide thing. Is you'll try to tell them everything that you possibly know, and you can't do that. I mean, break it up. You can break everything up. Just you don't have to tell them everything. You can have one concept of the cave and break it up into little stops, or instead of I've seen new people, and I've done it too, do an entire tour on one stop, and then now where are you going to go? So that's probably it's important, your timing, and trying, do your own thing. We pair up new guides with seasoned guides. Like I said earlier, it's on the job training, and you're picking up things, but you can't do their tour. You got to do your own.
Is there anything else that you can think of that you'd like to get across to me and to get across for the record? It's been a great interview so far.
Some people ask me if I like my job, and I say no. I say I love my job. It's a great job. It's not boring. We walk in the cave, we walk in the rotunda, and I'll tell people, especially a small group, get a little bit more informal. I said, my earliest recollections of Mammoth Cave is this room. And it's just as fresh as the first time I walked in.